Welcome back, everybody, to the School Leadership Show. This is Mike Dowdy. With me, as always, or almost always, Jen David Lang. Hi, Jen.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Fantastic. So great to see you, even though this is an audio medium for everybody else. It's nice to
We're still looking at each other over Zoom.
still
Like,
works for us. All right.
yeah.
So today I'm excited about this most recent book that you've summarized, and it is by Adam Grant. And we're going to talk about Adam Grant in a second and kind of give you the lay of the land on why he's such a big deal and why this is an important book. The book is called Hidden Potential: The Science of Achieving Greater Things. So it came out in 2023. So Jen, first of all, who's Adam Grant and why are we talking about this book?
Sure. Yeah, he may be less familiar. He's not an education specific person. He's a professor and organizational psychologist who also writes these popular science books. So before this one, people may have heard of Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know, or even Originals, How Nonconformists Move the World. But he's also been popping up in the New York Times. He wrote, I think, the most shared article maybe ever. It was December of 2021, so still pandemic-y, and he wrote an article about languishing, which is sort of supposed to be the counterpoint to thriving or flourishing. And that word really captured how people were feeling in the pandemic. We could put a link to it in the show notes if people are interested. But anyway, so yeah, he does research about issues concerning organizational psychology, and he really writes incredibly clearly, has great anecdotes, kind of like a Malcolm Gladwell sort of writer or Dan Pink. And yeah, it's a very readable book if you want to read it. And I also think it's fantastic to bring insights from other non-education fields into our field.
So fabulous. So how is this book organized? You
So
want to
yeah,
start
so
there, or do you want to
this
start
is
with
a
the main points?
yeah. Overall, I like this book because I found it to be optimistic, which is something more than you and everyone needs right now, where he's talking about how can we raise achievement. He means achievement in all walks of life, from guitar to javelin throwing. But for us, obviously, we're thinking about schools. But he's not talking about raising test scores or science of reading, right? It's a very optimistic way of how we can tap students' hidden potential or people's potential and get them to do even more. So yes. So he has three sections of this book. The first part, he talks about three individual character skills that we can develop in students to help them attain higher achievement. So again, they don't need to be born with these traits. They can be taught. So that's great for us in the education world. The second part is all about putting scaffolds into place, which every teacher knows that word. So he's got some great ideas about how we can use scaffolds to boost motivation and overcome obstacles to learning. And then finally, he talks about the systems that we need to help ensure that we are encouraging everyone to do their best.
So he begins right with a nod to Carol Dweck, a name familiar to, I'm sure, everyone who listens to this podcast. So do you want to kind of weave that in? Like, what's he have to say about growth mindset? And then, because I think that's an important point about how he gets to what his book is about, right?
Right. So there's nothing wrong with mindset. Growth mindset is a fantastic thing to have. I'm sure we each have a little bit of that, but it's not sufficient enough, right? We need to have the right scaffolding to really help students reach their potential. And he talks about a study of 15,000 high schoolers, where it found that nurturing their growth mindsets only boosted their grades when teachers also recognized their potential and their school environment encouraged them to embrace challenge. So it's one step, but now he's kind of adding to the recipe a little bit.
So let's talk about the recipe. So what's he adding? Because, and this is where I'm going to soapbox and grandstand a little bit. And I feel like all the Carol Dweck stands are probably going to come after me, and I'm down for that. Come at me,
Okay.
bro. But that's the kind of, like, yeah, mindset's great. And, and I made the prediction before we got on. I said that mindset And that kind of work is probably in 10 years is going to be in the same place that Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences is. That it's a thing, it's a theory, and you can find examples of it, but in order to really operationalize growth mindset in a way that's going to impact student learning, you have to do other things. It's not enough for people just to recognize, oh yeah, I can get better at anything if I practice for 10,000 hours. Well, no, it's more than that. So
Yes,
let's
yes.
get into it.
Sure. Yeah. So, he gives a couple of great anecdotes in the beginning. He talks about this boy, Kassan Henry, who's just a public school kid from Harlem. And he ends up defeating like a top ranked chess player in one of these elite private schools. And he works with his team to win the national junior high chess championship. So, why? Like, is he a chess prodigy? Does he, like you said, does he study for 10,000 hours? Like, what is it? But it's really because his team had a coach, his team, the Raging Rooks. I love that. Great name for a chess team. And what he really worked on were not the cognitive skills. Sure, you need cognitive skills to play chess, but it was the character skills that really boosted the whole team, because the whole team did extremely well. And so Adam Grant really focuses on three character skills that are very connected to unleashing individuals' potential. So he talks about determination, proactivity, and discipline. And in fact, he even cites another study where students who had kindergarten teachers who emphasized these skills, not literacy and math, these skills, students who focused on those skills, who had teachers who taught them how to develop those skills, when they were adults, they earned $320,000 more than their counterparts who didn't have teachers who focused on these skills. So, I mean, that's kind of incredible to hear that kind of a difference. So, and again, these are skills that are learned. They're not skills that you have to be born with.
So
Um,
determination, proactivity, and discipline. And if you think
yeah,
about it, that makes a ton of sense. If you've got those three things locked in, it's easy to improve based on your growth mindset, right? Like
sure.
if I
Yeah.
believe I can improve and I can do those things, right? Okay.
Yes, and he does use the term skill. He doesn't say these three character traits. He really calls them skills. And so, right, you take your growth mindset. So imagine the first one, right? Determination. When you are determined to move forward no matter what, at any cost. And he shares some stories about these polyglots. Those are people who speak lots and lots of languages. And, how did they get there? Were they just naturally gifted? Did they have parents and grandparents from 10 different countries who spoke to them when they were younger? No, no, really the difference was determination. It wasn't textbooks, flashcards, vocab lists. It was the fact that these people were willing to completely embarrass themselves and try again and just go out and try the language. They didn't wait until they got a 5 on their AP exam in French to go to France and learn the language. And he talks about just the power of seeking out that kind of discomfort and seeking out those kinds of mistakes. And it's often the thing we as teachers do the opposite of. We think we're serving our students by making sure they don't have discomfort, right? And they don't make mistakes. And in fact, I guess this is where he doesn't talk specifically about Howard Gardner, but if we have a student who isn't learning well, we're like, oh, maybe a different mode, right? Maybe they need it written down or they need images or graphic organizer. No, he's saying it's the opposite, that actually you need to be uncomfortable. As Ted Lasso says, if you're comfortable, you're doing it wrong. So,
Well,
one of the yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, no, I was going to say that's exactly it, right? We know people move when they're in that zone of proximal development. And we also know from the research that direct instruction works. So, okay, love it.
Yeah. So, like one of the polyglots purposely set out to make 200 mistakes a day. So imagine a teacher, reframing and saying to her class, The goal is for everyone to make, 10 mistakes in this 45-minute or 50-minute period, right? That we are going to learn when we dive in and make mistakes, and not when we wait for perfection. One of the things Adam Grant writes in his book, and this is a quote: comfort in learning is a paradox. You can't become truly comfortable with a skill until you've practiced it enough to master it. But practicing it before you master it is uncomfortable. So this is time for principals, tell your teachers to have their students get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I love it. And yeah, it's fantastic. And if you really consider the way many of us have approached, or the way folks approach instruction, it does. It feels like that mistakes are bad, instead of looking at it as, no, that's where the learning is.
Yep,
My Uncle Steve
exactly.
used to say that to me when I was skiing. He says,
Hmm.
if you're not falling, you're not learning.
There you go.
There it is.
Uncles know best. Yeah.
Uncles know best. All right. So we've got determination, proactivity, and discipline as those first skills that he talks
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. So let me dive into proactivity a little bit, because I think this is another area where schools, we're still mostly spoon feeding kids what they need to know, right? We're giving them the information they need. We're telling them in math class which problems to solve, right? We're not giving them a
And
scenario
how
and
to
saying,
solve them, by the way.
and how to solve, right? We're giving them all this. But really, proactivity is about seeking out the information yourself, seeking out the questions yourself. He talks about a world champion javelin thrower from rural Kenya, and he doesn't have any of the facilities, the equipment. Like, nobody is spoon feeding this guy anything. So what does he do? When asked who coached him, what does he say? YouTube. So basically he is watching on YouTube and he is distilling, where is the learning and how can I train myself? And really, that's where the learning happens as well. When you're taking ownership and you're active in that learning, and you're not waiting for people to drop knowledge on you. And he has a big section also on feedback too. And this is not just for students. I think this is where administrators can get something out of the book as well. But he's like, we really need to seek out feedback, right? Don't wait for someone to come knock on your door as the principal or assistant superintendent to say, hey, Mike, this is how you might improve. You've got to actually seek it out, look for it, and listen to more than just what you want to listen to. You really need to have sort of a growth-driven approach to feedback, and that is also about proactivity. You might not connect the two, but seeking feedback is also proactivity and
Proactive,
learning.
right? Yep.
Yeah, yeah. And then the third area he talks about is discipline, and this was very new for me. He describes discipline as the opposite of all around perfection or perfectionism. I had never connected those two things together. So discipline is about focus, right? You're a school leader, you have one initiative that you're really, hell bent on focusing on, or in a math class or an English class, one skill you're trying to work on. But if someone has, we've all seen students who are perfectionists. That means they're trying to be perfect in everything, and you can't prioritize everything, right? If you're trying to run a marathon, you can't also say, I'm also going to show up early to work every day, right? Pick one now, one for later.
Well,
And that
we've talked
perfection,
about it even in the context of school improvement planning. If
yeah.
everything's a priority, then nothing is. And I'm trying to think of what book was that we talked about, where it was like you can have maybe 3 things that you're working on.
Well, Doug Reeves talks about it in 100-Day Leaders. And also, there's Steve Jobs talks about, he has his employees brainstorm 10 possible initiatives, and then he slashes the bottom 7 and he only focuses on the top 3.
Yep.
But yeah, so I hadn't really thought about, perfectionism is about, this sort of generic perfectionism in everything. And if you want to be disciplined, you got to kind of pick what you're focusing on. And he has a really funny quote about perfectionism that I'd never heard before, which is, if perfectionism were a medication, the label would alert us to common side effects. Warning, may cause stunted growth. because the idea that like research shows, you know what the connection is between perfectionism and performance? Nothing. There's nothing. Perfectionists are no better performers than non-perfectionists, and in fact may do worse because they're focusing on too many things. And in the vein of too many things, that's also connected to being vague. So, you know, teachers out there, by saying to kids, just do your best, do your best, that's not specific enough to help them develop the discipline they need. You know, so study after study shows, don't tell kids just to do your best, give them specific, challenging goals. You know, same for your assistant principal, for your teachers. Give specific, challenging goals. Don't just tell people to do their best, because that will help them develop in this third area, discipline.
Nice. All right, where do you want to head next?
So yeah, so those are the three character skills he really says help to unleash the potential of individuals: being determined, proactive, and disciplined. But again, kind of like the growth mindset, it's not enough just to develop those skills in kids, right? They also often need scaffolds. And obviously that's something in education. We know that word more than many other professions. It's, you know, when it's not enough just to pull yourself up and buck up your determination, right? So a scaffold is, it's basically a temporary supporting structure, and it helps students learn better. It helps them overcome obstacles. So he shares a few that are very relevant for the field of education. And the first type of scaffold is a scaffold to sustain motivation, right? So think about one of our biggest problems in schools: kids, we give them a lot of rote work and they're lost. They just don't feel the motivation, particularly now, right? And they are burning out, they are bored, they are not engaged, right? So he gives a couple of suggestions for scaffolds that can boost motivation. The first one is just breaks. And I know that seems so obvious and so mundane, but the truth of the matter is a break actually boosts learning. It's not just to take a break, but it's, you know, you hear all these stories about people in showers getting, you know, wonderful ideas for what they can do. So before your
Absolutely.
students even need a break, give them a break, right? That will give them fresh ideas, help them solve problems, and it will deepen learning. And it's not a hard thing to do. And obviously, leaders, you too, if you can give your teachers some break, you know, come in, take over the class for a few minutes, let them get a coffee, that's going to help for your teachers as well. So that's a pretty simple one. The second one he calls, the second scaffold is called deliberate play. And many of us have heard the term deliberate practice. And we hear about famous musicians who find, you know, just a few measures of music and they just practice that difficult part over and over and over. But so that gives us this false idea, like the 10,000 hours of like, oh, if you really want to learn something, you know, you need deliberate practice. But actually, deliberate practice doesn't fully get people there, because they get burnt out. And so he takes deliberate practice and play, which has shown to boost learning, and he puts them together with this term called deliberate play. So he gives an example of the best shooter in NBA history, Stephen Curry. And he says that originally he was really underrated, right? He was small for the NBA. He had weaknesses. He wasn't quick. He was explosive. And then a trainer, Brandon Payne, understood just what kind of scaffolding Curry needed. He's like, I got to take these boring workouts and make them more playful and make them more fun, right? So instead of just straight, you know, drills, run, 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 dribble, 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 instead he made up all these little games and these novel challenges, surprise, novelty, right? Variety, doing new things. And then, you know, the rest is history there. So, you know, so how can we do that in our schools? And it's not that complicated, but, you know, mix it up a little bit. Don't just do, you know, 40 straight minutes of vocabulary instruction, or, you know, work, like mix it up, do a little of this, do a little bit of that. Embrace variety, you know, come in one day in a costume from the Revolutionary War, you know. Um, Healthy competition, not between students, but competition between yourself or the clock, you know, can help. I think we've banished a lot of the idea of competition, but it can, when done well, it can really boost learning. So those are some of the ideas for
And
the
those are
first
and
type
those
of.
are great ideas, right? And nothing we don't know or haven't heard of, but it's interesting to see them, those strategies put into this context.
Yeah,
And
and described as a scaffold.
exactly. Yep. I like that.
And then he talks about the second type of scaffold is to overcome obstacles. And one of the ones he talks about is synergy, which I think is just a fancy way of really just saying teamwork. And he tells a great story about in 1944, it was very difficult to become a US naval officer. And for the first time, there was a first cohort of Black men who were allowed to train as officers and attempt to pass the exam. They even had a name. They were the Golden 13. And instead of, competing against each other, like a lot of the other candidates did, they decided to come together and work together. And what that did was it allowed them, first of all, to understand each other's expertise, right? Who's the guy who's the best in math? Who knows the most about knot tying, right? Or knows the most about law? And so they were really able to support each other. And in one of Adam Grant's classes, he lets his students phone a friend on one exam question. And what that does is you have to be working with your teammates to know who to call for which question, right? So whatever we can do to promote students working in teams. There's also the tutor or the coach effect that if this Golden 13, when they were explaining their areas of expertise to each other, they were learning it even better. So, right, do you have opportunities in your classes for kids to coach or to tutor each other? So that's another example of a scaffold is the synergy or this group work, which again, like you said before, right? That's not something new in schools, but just understanding the potential of it and the research behind how it can support
Right.
learning.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the final category of scaffolding is scaffolds that help students get unstuck. So here's a few, and maybe I'll just talk about one of them, which is to make sure students have a range of guides. So for example, research has showed that role models are really powerful for people if they look like you, if they come from where you come from. So for example, one study showed that girls were more likely to patent an invention if they had female inventors as role models. So can you provide a range of different types of guides for kids? So not just the one teacher standing in front of the classroom, but maybe different classmates or other adults in the building. The other thing to think about, and I love this in schools, is to find non-experts to help students when they struggle. So you would think, well, wait, don't we want, that math teacher who's the expert? Well, not necessarily because of Einstein's curse, which is that Einstein knew so much that he wasn't necessarily the best physics teacher. He couldn't think back to, hey, what is it like not to understand these theorems? And when you're at the beginning, he couldn't. So if you've got, a sixth grader struggling with executive skills, right? What do? Oh, let's pair that kid with someone who is super organized. No, actually, let's pair that kid with someone who finally mastered it, but at first had executive functioning challenges. So these are some of the kinds of scaffolds that he talks about.
And that's really cool, like to sort of expand that definition of being able to see yourself in a role beyond it just being about gender and race, because there's more to it than that. And it's interesting to think, in terms of, self-improvement in that way, like to say, let me find somebody who's gone along a similar journey that I have and, maybe avoid some of the pitfalls. Yeah, totally
Yeah.
makes sense.
And, and that and the other ideas he's suggesting, we're not talking about time, money, these are all things that translate into the world of education and are absolutely doable.
All right. And then the third part of the book is about systems. So
Right. So again,
this is where you had a little trepidation, though. You want to talk about that?
sure. Yeah. So I think we can all agree teaching certain character skills is fantastic as teachers or administrators putting scaffolds in place. But the section on systems, he talks a lot about the education system in Finland. So I fear some eye rolling, but luckily it's a podcast, so I can only see your eye rolling, Mike, not anyone else's. But yeah, he talks about what systems can we put in place to help ensure that what boosts learning is systematized. It's not just like, oh, you're in Mike's class, that's good, and he has systems, but not Jen's, or he has scaffolds and not Jen. So how can we, what are the systems? So he talks about Finland, which people have heard already way too much about, that they consistently rank among the top in the world academically on international measures of achievement, right? They always outperform the US. And so, but why have they done that, right? Some people say, oh, it's because they're homogeneous, they're all white, but Sweden, Norway, Denmark, they have similar populations and they haven't performed as well. So, Finland has built some intentional national systems that helps with learning. But their systems, not like our systems of testing, their systems like to build relationships, to provide for individual support, to ensure that students develop a love of learning. So, so I love these. So I'm going to throw them out there. And if people can think how to translate them into their schools, great. So the first one he talks about, a system that builds in relationship building, is looping. And it's not very popular. I think only 3% of US schools have looping, but it's when the same group of kids stays with a teacher for more than 1 year. So they might be in second grade and have Mr. Gonzalez, and then for third grade, they have Mr. Gonzalez, right? And actually, Adam Grant also had a very popular article about looping recently in the Times. We can put that in the show notes if people are interested. But people always say, oh, but what if the teacher's not so good? Then you get a bad teacher 2 years in a row. But Adam Grant shares that research shows that looping actually has the greatest positive effect on those teachers who are less effective and those students who are the lowest achieving. So if there's some way to consider looping in your school, that's a way to systematize relationship building, because it's not, people are concerned, oh, but then the teacher doesn't develop an expertise in the second grade curriculum.
Oh,
But
wow.
really, it's focusing more on building the relationships and having teachers specialize in their students rather than in the second grade curriculum.
Especially at the elementary level.
Yeah.
Yes, love it.
Then this one, they also have an accountability system for principals in Finnish schools, where rather than focusing on test scores, they really say that Finnish principals must prioritize individual students' needs and have that responsibility. So, he gives an anecdote about one student who's particularly, and the principals there teach a class. So I do know some people do that here. They do teach a class to be very focused, and they stay with a deeper understanding of what students' needs are. So one Finnish principal, there was a student who was struggling greatly. So the principal put that kid in his class, and really made that child's education the principal's personal mission. So I don't know how much you can do it here, change our accountability systems. We've got rubrics and other things that are focused on other things, but just throwing it out there. And then they also systematize individualized support. So yes, in the US, we do try to look for early signs of struggle among kindergartners and making sure they get the supports they need. But in Finland, they really go even further to put together a whole student welfare team, not just for students who are struggling the most, but really for every student. They try to systematize the benefits of breaks, right? We talked about breaks. And so they give kids extra recess, and the teachers are not supervising this. So then the teachers, and you're going to have to close your ears on this one, the teachers in Finland get an hour more time a day than US teachers for non-teaching issues. So that's giving them a break. When you have to teach, it's hard to reflect, have a break, and improve. And then finally, because there's been so much research on the benefits of deliberate play, in Finland, they've systematized the love of learning by making sure that, for example, high school students do less than 3 hours of homework a week. I hope no high school students are listening to this. Kindergartners spend most of their day in play. And even when they get past that playtime, they really make sure in middle school that there are a lot of opportunities for choice and for decision making in the curriculum. Right. So those are some of the things that Finland does. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I think we're starting to finally figure out that a lot of these things are just innate character traits that they actually need to be taught and can be taught. Like, and it's a shame it's taken us this long to get there, but that is the idea, right? I mean, this really is making Carol Dweck's work much more concrete, at least in my mind, in
Or
terms of,
richer. I think it's
yeah,
these extra layers. You can see it layering with that. Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
really
So that's a
counting it.
great
You really want
idea.
to make sure the Carol Dweck fans don't come for us, don't you?
or Carol herself. But
Carol, if
anyway,
you're
yes,
listening, come on the podcast and fight with me about mindsets.
that
Uh,
sounds good.
well,
Yes.
great. So the book is Hidden Potential, The Science of Achieving Greater Things by Adam Grant. Came out in 2023.
Yep.
So Jen's doing a summary of it, and
Yep.
fantastic. Any parting shots?
No, I think, and it's also a pleasure to read. So if you're looking for, the kind of book that has great anecdotes like some of the ones we shared, definitely it's a good summer read
Yeah,
as well.
I think you were right. Like I'd put him in the Malcolm Gladwell, Daniel Pink kind of
Yep.
category where they translate the flashy science, or they maybe translate the boring science into something flashy that people will read. So
Yeah. Or our favorite, right? Atomic Habits,
oh yeah, James Clear.
James Clear. Yeah. Yeah. That kind of book. So yeah.
Oh yeah, let's
Anyway,
go back.
great.
Did you, I want to, this is totally not germane, but I think I'm going to leave it in. I don't care. So from Atomic Habits, have you been able to add new habits with Anchor Habits?
Have I been able to add
Like to
habits
your
myself?
schedule? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I was literally just talking about habit stacking, if not today, then yesterday.
Give me an
Yes.
example of one that you're doing.
So I have started resistance band training to help with my back.
Okay.
And so my habit stacking, well, I had already developed the habit of when I wake up in the morning, I drink a full glass of water because I did pass out once from dehydration. So that's a habit I already have. And then after I drink the glass of water, then I do my resistance band training. So that's a habit stacking
I
that
love
I
it.
do. Why
That's
do you ask? Are you in the
No, I was
middle of?
just curious because I added a new one. I think I've been tracking it on my phone. Let's see. I got to know how long I've been doing it. So I started doing like I started doing push-ups in the morning. So 50
Yes.
push-ups. Today's day 121.
So you've got a streak.
My streak going. So for me, it's
Yeah.
like it's the anchor habit, then the streak. So immediately I wake up, do the push-ups. The other one that I love, because I have one of those, probably most people do now, an electric toothbrush that has a timer, right? So it goes off after 2 minutes. So
Yes.
when I'm brushing my teeth, I do deep air squats, and I've been doing it for 2 minutes. And I got up to 55 this morning before my legs were burning so hard that I had to stop. But that whole idea of anchor habits totally works. So if you stuck with us to the end of the podcast to hear what we're doing for our anchor habits and habit stacking, good for you. If
And
not,
I'm adding one more. One
yeah.
more I forgot. And this was from the book by the Starrettes called Built to Move.
Uh-huh.
They really talk about the importance of building your balance as you age. So my toothbrush habit stacking, I don't think he calls them anchor habits. I think he says habit
Oh, it does
stacking.
the
Like,
stacking.
so
Okay.
I have the habit of brushing my teeth. I never forget to brush my teeth. When I brush my teeth, I close my eyes and stand on one leg.
Oh, I
And that's
love it.
building my balance. But maybe I'll alternate with some squats.
There you go. All right. Well, thanks, Jen. It's a pleasure as always. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the School Leadership Show, a podcast for aspiring and practicing school leaders. Send your comments, questions, and show ideas to me, Mike, at schoolleadershipshow.com. And please consider rating the podcast in iTunes and leaving a comment. And definitely pass the show along to your colleagues.